you on the East Coast, you grabbed your lunch. And for those joining us from the West Coast, I guess another cup of coffee to start your day. So today's topic is going to be a quick session on value-based plan designs with a case study at the end to kind of show you how those value-based plan designs are deployed in reality. So I wanted to, we always, every power lunch, we do a quick little update on what's going on in the industry and, of course, in Washington. And I have to say, I was chatting with Kelly earlier, and I was saying every single day something big happens, it seems like. So most of you know that I read the news thoroughly every morning for the health. I scan healthcare news. And Aetna made two big splashes in the last week. First, 2 weeks ago, they announced that they would be entering into an agreement to sell the life and disability portions of their business to the Hartford. That actually closed on November 1st. So the Hartford will now be the second largest group life and disability insurer in the U.S. And then right on the heels of that announcement, CVS Caremark has made an offer to acquire the third largest health insurer, Aetna, for $66 billion. The deal would merge the largest pharmaceutical benefits manager with one of the oldest and top-tier health insurers. We're going to talk a little bit about how that may potentially affect the marketplace in a second. And then, of course, right on the heels of that, Anthem, the number 2 largest health insurer, announced plans to start its own PBM. So they're going to manage their own pharmacy benefits for their group plans with the backshop help of CVS Caremark as the network. So they're going to try to set that up very similar to the way that United Healthcare has their own PBM through OptumRx. So very interesting, lots of movement in the marketplace, but I think it just shows that insurers want more control over the pharmaceutical component of care and more control over the specialty drugs and the pharmaceutical cost piece. So with the large amount of consolidation taking place, there are some potential upsides to that, with greater efficiencies and hopefully cost containment or cost control. But of course, we're all concerned a little bit about the downside with that, with the mega corporations and the consolidation driving up prices. Really, if you think about it, with the CVS Aetna acquisition, that company will then own an insurance block, a PBM, and the dispensing arm with the pharmacies and the minute clinics. So some are very concerned that, that could lock out some other pharmacies from a competitive perspective. And then, of course, wrapping up the week last week, Cigna posted its quarterly earnings, and both Aetna and Cigna reported huge profit gains in the last quarter. So Aetna posted from last year, third quarter of 2016 to third quarter 2017, a 52% profit margin increase over the year, and Cigna announced that its profit margin was up as well. So very interesting that they're making a profit. And then legislatively in Washington, just want to bring a couple of things to the forefront that affect us in healthcare. Children's health insurance programs, the government program that covers 8.9 million children, the House voted last Friday to reauthorize the federal funding to reactivate the health insurance that goes now beyond the end of the year. It's a 5-year reauthorization of funding, but it still has to go through the Senate for a vote. Hopefully that will pass the Senate as well. And of course, yesterday was a big day for Democrats. A year ago, Democrats were blindsided by Donald Trump's victory for the White House. And yesterday they won 2 key gubernatorial races, one in Virginia and one in New Jersey, certainly renewing their hopes of someday being back in control of the House and the Senate in the future. And then lastly, tax reform. So how this affects healthcare. Tax reform, the proposed bill that was released from the House GOP plan last week, proposed a $1.5 trillion tax cut. And certainly everybody's concerned that when they are proposing a tax cut that large, that would mean entitlement tax cuts as well to keep the deficit under control. And a lot of the entitlement cuts they're looking at are healthcare related. Significant impact for healthcare organizations. So with the House tax plan, so that the separate Senate GOP tax bill is set to be released either later this week or early next week, and they have a different program than what the House released last week. But significant impact for hospitals and healthcare organizations. So what the two, I guess, the upside and the downside on the tax cuts, profitable companies like hospitals that are running well will come out ahead because the proposed slash and corporate tax rate is being reduced from 35% to 20% in the House bill. And on the negative side, highly leveraged companies or companies that are in debt, hospitals like Tenet Healthcare is, they're in debt $15 billion while it tries to restructure, and that includes a lot of hospitals across the country. The proposed cap on the interest rate deduction at 30% of earnings will likely have a negative effect on those companies that are significantly leveraged. So that is the Washington and news update. We're going to jump right into kind of our value-based plan design strategy update and really understanding the real cost drivers of the plans. And then lastly, we're going to jump right into a case study that's going to highlight and walk you through how to use one of these. So we've kind of touched on healthcare reform. One of the things that I want to mention, and I put a slide in here because I want everybody to be very conscious that Cadillac tax is still in play. So we've met with several organizations over the last 2 weeks that are way above that tax cap. And that is something that should be front and center, hair on fire focus for all of us if you're over that threshold, because that's still the law of the land. I know that the President has said many times that he's going to take another run at dismantling ACA and Obamacare in January, but right now the House and the Senate could not pass the change. And so it is still the law of the land, and it's still scheduled for January 1st, 2020 for that Cadillac tax. So we should be looking at the total cost of care, cost of medical pharmacy care per employee. It's still set at $10,200 for a single, $27,500 for a family, and certainly you should be looking at, if you're over that 40% tax is going to be very painful if it stays in place. So kind of jumping right into our value-based topic of today, why are people looking at a strategy change? And I think, if you've joined my webinars in the past couple of months, we've been doing these for almost a year now, first Wednesday of every month. This month we've had to push it back a week. But the consumer-directed health plans really produced savings, right? So it made us take a look at adding consumerism to our programs to have employees and members have a little bit more skin in the game when they're going to use the healthcare benefits, right? So we wanted people to go to the pharmacy and recognize that they just got a prescription for $300 and have them say, this is coming out, I'm in a high deductible plan, potentially with an HSA with employer dollars in there. Since it's coming out of their bank account, they're asking questions like, is there a generic alternative? So the consumer-directed health plans that have been in the market for, 8 to 10 years have definitely taken hold. They've become a predominant plan design offered by over 60% of employers. But really, that did little to curb our overall arching expenses and really having us relook at what's driving our trend. So if you take a look at, for most companies that renew in January, in February, we're looking at calendar year-end utilization for 2017 and really identifying what are the chronic conditions within our population and what are the high claimants, what categories do they fall in, and what specifically the specialty drugs, what specialty drugs are driving costs. And so this has been a game changer. Most employers have looked at this and said the consumer-directed health plans have not been enough, and we need to move forward with the value-based plan design strategy. And so, of course, if you look at all of the 2018 surveys, the top two major concerns are no surprise to us, right? It's skyrocketing specialty pharmaceutical costs because they're some of those specialty drugs can be over $1 million a year, and certainly more and more in development in the pipeline. If you look at what specialty drugs are in the pipeline, they've specifically targeted chronic illnesses. So smartly, the pharmaceutical manufacturers are looking at drugs that they can produce that are long-term use drugs. So not once and done, but chronic care like MS, and some of those drugs are significantly in the pipeline for development, including diabetic medications as well as cholesterol managing medications. So those are definitely things to watch. And if you haven't looked at the prevailing pipeline on the specialty drugs and what categories they're targeting, you should, and compare that to your utilization. And then, of course, the high claimants in the chronic diseases. Over 50% of America has a chronic disease that they're managing, and those are the populations in our companies that we're managing benefits for. This next slide is startling, and I put it in here because the statistics are pretty standard when it comes to looking at high claimants and the cost of high claimants and how it's rising. And I think if you look at the $1 million plus claims, it's because we're seeing more specialty drugs impacting the total cost of care. Those genetic editing technical advances that have been made that are in trial treatments right now that are going to potentially cure some chronic illnesses that have been debilitating as well as terminal. Those treatments are, well north of $500,000 a treatment. So if you look at what's driving our costs, it's very compelling to take a look at, those consumer-directed health plans. Once that person hits their high deductible, they're still fully covered, and so those aren't going to control long-term costs when it comes to your sickest, most expensive people. And I will say that time and time again, it's gotten even more prevailing that 90% of your dollars are spent by 10% of your people, which is why employers are looking at the value-based plan designs as the next step in controlling their trend and their high cost. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is a value-based plan design. So a value-based plan design, I love the second bullet because it very succinctly wraps up with a bow exactly what a value-based plan design, the definition is, to me at least, and it's aligning healthcare dollars with the value delivered. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to minimize or give a benefit to the member for participating in basically a disease management program or a program that you've developed based on your utilization. So step one in looking at what to do with a value-based plan design is to look at your utilization, right? So if you go through open enrollment in January, in February or March, you should be meeting with your carrier and you should be determining what your chronic illnesses are within your population, and whether today we're going to go through diabetes because it's always in the top 5 to 10 afflicting categories in every single client we look at just because it's such a prevalent disease in the U.S. So what you're doing is you're looking at your utilization, you're identifying what the specific chronic illnesses or high-cost claimants category buckets that you have within your plan, and then you're saying, okay, what value-based plan design can I wrap around that particular illness, chronic illness, or disease to influence my trend or pricing going forward? And typically, you design these value-based plan designs with your carrier or your TPA and certainly your consultant. So we sit down and together we try to align what's driving our costs, what are the value-based plan designs available, and how do we deploy them. So this slide kind of, and we're going to share these slides with you afterwards. So I know Kelly posts them on her webinar, past webinar link. They'll be available also on my website so that you can download them and look at them again. And we'll also have a recording of this WebEx so that you can re-listen to it or share it via a YouTube video. So these are just kind of the top utilized value-based plan design strategies. You know, whether you choose a center of excellence for certain things, whether you implement telehealth, again, the adherence to chronic medication for chronic illnesses, that's a big one, and that's the example that we're going to use in a second when I go through kind of the disease management program for diabetes. But it's really just saying, you know, for an example, what is the highest afflicting chronic illness in our population, and what are the levers that you can pull, and then giving the employees, steering them to the proper place and the proper coaching or proper disease management program, and then giving them a benefit for doing that. And the benefit is lower out-of-pocket costs for them. So 40% of large employers are implementing these incentives this year for 2018. And in exchange for the person participating, the member participating in the value-based plan design, they're going to get the benefit of having a lower out-of-pocket cost if they participate. The beautiful thing is with the high deductible plans, you can kind of wrap the strategy together with the value-based plan designs. So if you have a high deductible plan and you as an employer contribute a dollar amount into the health savings account on behalf of the employee, right now the average is $750 to $800 employer contribution into the HSA. You can use these value-based plan design incentives to let them have more money or give them a benefit. If you fall into this category, you can do these following things and earn more credits in the HSA. So that's another way to kind of wrap the two strategies together. So we're going to jump right into our example, our case study. And of course, it's no surprise to any of us that in the U.S. per year, in 2016 actually, we spent almost $250 billion on diabetic treatments. And that's globally because diabetics have a lot of comorbidities with the circulatory problems. So it's podiatric, it's certainly the retinal eye and blindness that comes along with diabetes. And the frightening statistic in 2017 is 29 million Americans have diabetes today, and 86 million are pre-diabetic, so potentially going into that diabetic bucket. So the value-based plan design, this is a really good example, I think, of how to implement one, is really taking a look at your population. And if you've heard me speak at some of the conferences, you'll know that I'm a big fan of looking at your pharmaceutical utilization data and looking at the chronic prescriptions, so your 90-day supply prescriptions, so your ongoing prescriptions for people that are treating chronic illnesses, and looking at your adherence rate. And your PBM, your partner on the pharmacy side, whether it's coupled with your carrier or whether you carve it out directly to a PBM for cost savings, they should be able to tell you in that category with a 90-day, anybody with a 90-day supply, how frequently are they getting refills. So if they have a 90-day supply and they're getting a refill every 145 days, they're not compliant. They're not taking their medicine every day. And that's really what you want to get after. You want to try to understand how compliant your people are with their chronic illnesses. Diabetes is a great one to take a look at because you can go through your medical utilization data. Your carrier can do this for you, and they can tell you specifically how many diabetics you have in your population by the diagnosis codes and coupled with the prescription information. So once you know how many diabetics you have in your population, you can designate a coaching or a disease management program specifically for diabetes, where you can designate that they have to get the following screenings every year: their retinal exam, podiatric care on a regular basis, making sure that they're compliant with their medicines and getting a 90-day refill on time, plus or minus 5 days is compliant, and really taking a look at whether they're monitoring their glucose levels on a regular basis. So there are plenty of programs out there that you can coordinate with your carrier or your TPA. And then once you've implemented you've sent out information to the diabetics that have been identified in your population, and you said, here's the program that we want you to participate in, and they electively participate in that program. That's important. They electively participate in it. Then you can have them earn the bonus, right? So what typically you do is you allow them to purchase the glucose monitors, the test strips, and maybe even waiving their diabetic medication copays for the 90-day supply. So the plan will lose money on the prescription drug program because you're paying for their copay and you're paying for their test strips and the glucometer and things like that. But on average, if you can get a diabetic to be compliant with all of the regimens and the things that they should be, on average, your per employee per year cost savings is over $4,000 per diabetic. So that's pretty significant if you have a big population of diabetics in your population. So again, that is kind of wrapping up the value-based plan design explanation. Hopefully you can take a look at that example and kind of look at your utilization and try to put together a path forward for your organization on what are our top afflicting diseases, what are the top drivers of cost, and how can we implement some value-based plan designs. I think you're going to be hearing a lot more about this strategy in the future because the carriers just aren't doing a good job at disease management and calling out that population and getting them engaged in programs. And I think the value-based plan design provides enough incentives that it's been very successful in deploying this strategy to get people to participate in the disease management programs that are so valuable to not only reducing our costs, but having people take better care of themselves and being healthier. And healthier people are at work and they're more engaged in doing their job. So that wraps up our session for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Anybody who has any questions at all, feel free to contact me directly. And of course, we're taking a holiday in December, and the next Power Lunch will be held in January. We moved it to the second January of the month, second Wednesday of the month to avoid people still being on holiday for the new year. So we'll reconvene our Power Lunch on January 10th. We'll send out the topic and the agenda for that in the next month. And again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to either email me or call me directly. And you can visit my webpage, which is listed there, mbgrayhealthcare.com, for a copy of the slides. And under the Marybeth's 2 cents, which is my editorial section of the webpage, I have some of the news items that I discussed at the beginning of the session. So if you joined us a little bit late and you want to revisit the news items that happened in the last week or two, you can go out to my webpage and view those topics. And that's it for us for today. Kelly?
Thank you so much, Marybeth. It was wonderful. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. If you want to hear more from Marybeth, feel free to join us at one of our 2018 conferences. She's going to be the opening keynote in San Francisco. And registration is now open. We're running a year-end special. Cheapest price all year. But again, thanks, Marybeth, and we look forward to seeing everyone in January.
Great.
Have a good
Thank you
day.
so much, Kelly. Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of the week.
Bye-bye.